In this video, we're going to look at EventSentry's process monitoring functionality. Process monitoring is part of the system health component. So if we take a look here, and we look here at the bottom, you'll notice a process monitoring package, a global package that I created, and part of that package is the processes component. The process monitoring component can actually do two different things. The first part is simply monitoring processes and making sure they're active. So if you have a critical process that's not a service, and you want to make sure that process is active and get notified if it's not, or if not enough instances of that process are available, then EventSentry will log an alert to the event log and let you know that that process is no longer active. And you can either take automatic action to restart that process, dispatch an email, etc., etc. The second part of this feature is showing all processes that are actively listening for incoming TCP connections, or showing all processes that have active TCP connections. So I'm sure you're all familiar with the Netstat command and have probably used it a few times for troubleshooting purposes. And this feature is very similar to Netstat, except that it gives you most of the information that Netstat would give you, but for all of your monitored hosts. So let's take a look here. Netstat, here if we execute it with the AB switch, that will show us all TCP connections that are active, so either listening or that are active, along with the binary, the executable, is actually responsible for that. So we can see several hosts, several processes here from part of Windows that are listening for incoming connections, and then also some connections, processes that have active connections to remote hosts. So for example, here our EventSentry agent here is connected to the EventSentry collector that's running on DC1. So Netstat will show you processes that are listening for incoming connections and also active connections. At the bottom here, we can also see UDP connections. Those are currently not covered by EventSentry. But that information here is what EventSentry essentially collects. And why is that important? Well, this is useful for both troubleshooting purposes, but especially for security reasons. When you have a large network that you're monitoring, you probably want to know which processes on your servers and workstations are actually listening for incoming TCP connections. And why do you want to know that? Because you want to have as few processes listening for incoming connections as possible. Of course, there's always Windows system processes that are actively running on a system that are listening for incoming connections, which we can't really prevent unless we block the firewall ports. Well, you want to make sure that only the absolute minimum number of processes that are required are listening for incoming connections, so you can reduce the attack surface. This could be some user on a development workstation running their own web server that's maybe not on the latest version. It could be somebody running a database server. It could be a malicious process that's running on a workstation. So no matter what it is, you want to at least have a clear picture. You want to at least have the information so you can take action. Without that information, you really have no idea what's out there. You can, of course, have vulnerability scanners scanning your network regularly and identify open ports. So that's always something that's recommended. But sometimes it may even be useful to know if a process is listening for incoming connections, even if that connection is blocked by a firewall. Because that could be running on a laptop that may be moved to a different network where suddenly a different firewall profile in Windows applies. So it's definitely something you'll want to know. And a vulnerability scanner may not always pick everything up. But the Netstat monitoring feature in EventSentry will get that information directly from the OS, unfiltered, even if something in the middle may be blocking it, if a vulnerability scanner, for example, has to go through a router or something. So you get it directly from the source. So let's switch back to the management console. So here you can configure how often EventSentry gathers that information. So Windows doesn't actually provide a good hook for this information, so once a minute is usually sufficient. Of course, you can increase that if you would like, or you can also decrease it. For example, if you want to get that information every 15 seconds, for example. And the detect changes feature is really useful because what it does is it will tell you when there's a change. So if, for example, if you have a new process that suddenly started and that's listening for incoming TCP connections that was previously not doing that, then EventSentry can log an alert and it will say process abc.exe or process http.exe is listening on port 443. So now you know, okay, somebody just started a web server on this machine that was previously not running. Let's take a look at that. And where can you see that information? In the web reports, under network, since it affects the network, we have a processes netstat page, and that will look like this. So here you can see all the involved processes, so we can hit show all here. So here at a glance, this is a small test network, but here we can see all the processes that are listening for incoming connections or have an active TCP connection, because we're actually monitoring all of it, but we can restrict that. So for example, here we have 4 different connection states. Listening is being the most important one. So we'll just restrict it to that. So that reduces it to 12 processes. And here we can see that, with EventSentry here, we've got 3 EventSentry processes that are actively listening for connections, for example. We can see which IP addresses these processes are listening on, and that's actually quite useful. So for example here, let's pick the EventSentry web report. So if I restrict it to this and look at the detailed view here, I can see here that on DC1, the web reports are running. Which process ID? We can see that they're listening for incoming connections, and there's 2 ports that are open. Notice the difference between the 2 local IPs here. 0.0 means that it's listening on any interface that's configured on the host, whereas 127, of course, is the reserved IP address for the local host. So that port is not accessible from the internet. So those could be excluded. So if we wanted to make the report a little more useful, we could go here and we could say, okay, let's exclude 127.0.0.1. So I'm going to remove this process here again. And we're back to these 12 processes. And let's use the example of the WinRM feature. WinRM stands for Windows Remote Management, and it's something that can sometimes be used for exploits. And if you're not using it, it's something that you may want to consider turning off. So how do you know quickly if WinRM is actually running on your network and active? Let's take a look at our local ports here. WinRM uses port 5985, so we can find that here. And of course, the well-known port numbers here are actually resolved. So for the most common port names, we've got the description here built in. So you can click 5985. And what we'll notice here is that WinRM is actually listening on that port on all IP addresses on 5 servers and 2 domain controllers. And of course, here you have the full list. And you can always switch here, of course, to detailed. You can see all the hosts where this is running. So this is really, really useful, and you can use this for anything. So if you want to change this and say, hey, I want to see all servers where port 80 is running, okay, there's nothing. So there's no web servers running here. Port 8080, for example, and that will show us the EventSentry web reports. Or SQL Server, port 1433. Okay, there's nothing. But you can see here with just a few clicks, you have the entire Netstat configuration of your network available at your fingertips. And you can quickly and easily identify any process on your network that's listening for incoming connections, create reports and schedule them daily or weekly, or, like I mentioned earlier, receive alerts when something changes and you can take immediate action. I hope you'll find this useful, and if you are running EventSentry version 3.5, make sure to check out that feature and enable the Netstat configuration. There's really no downside, there's really no noticeable impact by enabling this. Running Netstat once a minute really doesn't impact system performance at all, and you get very valuable information that will help you with security and troubleshooting. Thanks for watching.